In Haiti, health authorities have registered 594 deaths from cholera and 32,141 suspected cases, almost 5 months after the resurgence of the disease. The Russian President, Vladimir Putin, delivered his annual address to the Federal Assembly to report on the main objectives of the nation's domestic and foreign policies. In Morocco, people protest in front of the parliament against the rising cost of food and fuel, defying the government's ban on marches. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. Haitian health authorities have registered 594 deaths from cholera and over 32,000 suspected cases, almost 5 months after the resurgence of the disease. According to the National Ministry of Health and Population, 2,000 confirmed cases were reported in the 10 departments of the country, together with 22,469 that are suspected cases and more than 28,300 hospitalizations with symptoms related to this pathology. The outbreak of cholera reappeared 3 years after the last recorded case, and the current increase in reported cases occurs in the midst of a severe social, political, economic, and security crisis that has limited the access of thousands of citizens to medical assistance. In addition, the highest number of cases corresponds to the capital and its surrounding cities that are under the influence of armed gangs, responsible for thousands of deaths and kidnappings in 2022. The government of El Salvador announced that it will maintain the state of emergency, a measure that revokes constitutional guarantees as part of the alleged fight against crime undertaken by Nayib Bukele's administration. Salvadoran authorities stated they will maintain the reforms to the legal system, which violates guarantees of due process. Meanwhile, human rights organizations warned that more than 60,000 people have been arrested for alleged links to criminal organizations. At the same time, political groups denounced the repressive actions carried out by police forces and condemned the government's plans to reduce both the number of municipalities in the country and the number of seats in the Legislative Assembly. And in the framework of her visit to Cuba, Colombian Vice President Francia Marquez gave an interview to the independent media outlet Belly of the Beast, in which she highlighted the many challenges her government faces in Colombia, including national education and ending the systemic exclusion of women, as well as Black and indigenous people.
I think we haven't progressed as much in Colombia as we would like. There are still many educational challenges in terms of guaranteeing access, guaranteeing permanency, but also in terms of critical education, another type of education that does not erase us, but rather help us to continue emancipating ourselves. And that starts with reading. It starts with the books that we read. The official history of Colombia is not one that was written with Black or indigenous people, or it did so, but in a pejorative way. Whenever people of African descent and indigenous people were mentioned, they were slaves.
Instead of enslaved people.
But they didn't tell us that we were enslaved. They didn't tell us that part. Now we see Black women telling their own stories. It's not somebody speaking in their name, but rather they themselves, narrating their experiences, their stories, their lives, speaking about their environments. I think that's a transformation that is happening, and Colombia is going through it now.
In this context, the Colombian leader emphasized her country's gratitude towards Cuba for its transcendental role in the peace process led by Gustavo Petro's administration.
I think that this new relationship needs to be one of gratitude, of Colombia thanking Cuba. In the midst of scarcity, in the midst of the U.S. blockade, Cuba opened its doors to hundreds of Colombian students who have come to study medicine here. And that is Cuba's gift, not just to Colombia, but to the world. And it is incredible how a nation that is economically blockaded is exporting to the entire world science and medicine. Second, Cuba has played a transcendental role in the path to peace that we have initiated in our country. Cuba has been there for us, and it has paid a price for that because the U.S. has placed Cuba on its list of countries that sponsor terrorism.
In Brazil, the most important carnivals in the world are underway, and its citizens have taken to the streets to enjoy the parades to the rhythm of samba. The city of Rio de Janeiro has returned to celebrate its famous carnivals after 2 years of restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The celebrations welcome a large number of tourists for both the Sambódromo and the street carnival. The Rio de Janeiro mayor's office estimates that it will generate approximately $880 million in the local economy this year. The events are held from February 17th to the 25th of the same month. Now we move on to other topics. On Tuesday, people in Madagascar are getting ready as tropical cyclone Freddy gets closer to the eastern Malagasy coast. The city of Manankara is expected to be on the front lines of the cyclone. Residents are doing their best to prepare for the storm, which is expected to bring strong winds and flooding. Tropical cyclone Freddy is set to hit eastern Madagascar on Tuesday, weakening slightly after brushing Mauritius with strong winds and torrential rains, according to observers. Meteorologists said they expected the weather phenomenon to make landfall on the island's east coast Tuesday night, with winds of up to 120 kilometers per hour. In Brazil, the death toll after the storm off the coast of Sao Paulo has risen to 40, according to an official report released on Monday by the state government. Brazilian President Lula da Silva overflew the area on Monday and stated that all levels of government will be brought together to attend to the injured, search for the missing, and restore roads, power, and telecommunication links in the region. On top of the deceased, 40 people are currently reported missing, and more than 1,700 people have been forced to leave their homes due to the flooding and the landslides. Authorities said municipal teams with psychologists and social workers are working to receive the victims' relatives, as a police team continues to work to identify the bodies. Let's take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on our TikTok account at telesurenglish.net, and also there you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, delivered his annual address to the Federal Assembly on Tuesday to report on the main directions to be taken in the domestic and foreign policy. The Russian president assessed the special military operation in Ukraine and the international situation before deputies, senators, military commanders, religious leaders, and other guests. The president's message included both political, economic, and ideological provisions and specific proposals in the field of legislative work of both chambers of the Russian parliament. During his speech, Putin stressed that his government did everything that was possible to peacefully resolve the Ukrainian crisis, but behind its back, a completely different scenario was being prepared. He also stated that the special military operation launched a year ago is aimed at protecting the population of our historic lands. Regarding the nation's economy, Putin stated that the sanctions imposed by the West against the country seek the suffering of the Russian people. However, he stressed that his government has implemented measures to avoid this objective.
Before the beginning of the special operation, heavy weapons deliveries were negotiated with Kiev. We remembered Kiev's attempt to seize nuclear weapons. The United States and NATO deployed near our borders their military bases and biological laboratories, prepared everything necessary for the Kiev regime for a big war. Today they publicly recognize it.
During his message, President Vladimir Putin was emphatic in stating that Russia initiated this special military operation to stop the war that the Ukrainian government, with the NATO support, was waging against the people of the Donbass.
Attacks on Donetsk and other cities of the Donbass, and the Donbass was blockaded. The people were terrified. All of this was against the United Nations resolutions, but everybody was ignoring what was going on. They triggered the war. I repeat, they. We use force to stop this war.
The head of state of the Russian Federation affirmed that the West supports wars and coups all over the world, which have plunged entire regions into chaos.
The love of money for the Ukrainian wars does not stop. The West supports coups d'etat all over the world. At the Munich conference, they were accusing us a lot, but it seems that they were doing it so that everybody would forget what the West did during the last decades. The West plunged whole regions into chaos.
And over 12,000 asylum seekers disembarked in Italy between January 1st and February 20th of the current year. This is almost 3 times as high as those registered in the same time of 2022. According to an official report by the Italian Ministry of the Interior, during the last weeks, more than 5,000 migrants arrived to the coasts, which shows the worsening of the world migration crisis. Specialists assure that among the immigrants, there are more than 1,000 people coming from the Ivory Coast, over 900 from Pakistan, and over 900 from Guinea. In this regard, migration authorities reported on Monday that a boat with 46 people on board, one of them dead, had been intercepted in the vicinity of Lampedusa. Immigration to Europe from Africa is a product of the systemic plundering of the continent's resources, both natural and mineral, combined with famine, environmental crisis, armed conflicts, and political instability in the region. And now we address other topics. On Monday, at least 6 people were killed and 300 injured after 2 new earthquakes of magnitude 6.5 and 5.8 were recorded south of Turkey. According to Turkish media, 249 or 94 people were injured in the southeastern province of Hatay. 18 of them are in serious condition and have already been transferred to the cities of Adana and Doriotol. The Euro-Mediterranean Seismological Center reported that the earthquake was registered 9 kilometers from Antakya in Turkey and 75 kilometers from the Syrian city of Latakia at a depth of 10 kilometers. The telluric movements were intercepted or perceived in Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, Egypt, and Cyprus.
People panicked. It was a very powerful earthquake. There were buildings near the tent where we were. So people were cut off from their families. I live here. I suffered the earthquake, but I was with friends who had come as volunteers. So we tried to reassure people. Currently, we're looking at where people need help, and at the same time, our friends are trying to reassure people because there has been a real panic. Because people psychologically still suffer the after effects of the first. And we were checking at the same time where we are going to have to go to help people.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In Morocco, a protest in front of the parliament in Rabat denounced the rising costs of food and fuel, defying the government's ban on marches. The protests were called by the Moroccan National Front, an umbrella organization for human rights associations, leftist parties, and trade unions. Demonstrators were complaining about the lack of access to education and healthcare and about not being able to afford food nor fuel. Veteran activist Khadija Rijadi, a member of the Moroccan Human Rights Association, said the fact that the protests did not gather many people is due to the government's ban on protests and absolute control over the media. And President Bashar al-Assad paid a working visit to the Sultanate of Oman, where he was welcomed at the royal private airport by His Majesty the Sultan Hayman bin Turek. During the talks, His Majesty the Sultan reiterated his condolences to President Bashar al-Assad and to the Syrian people for the victims of the devastating earthquake that shook the region, and confirmed his country's continued support to Syria to overcome the effects of the quake, the repercussions of the war, and the siege imposed on the Syrian people. On his part, President al-Assad expressed his deep appreciation to Sultan Hayman bin Turek, the Omani government, and to the Omani people for their solidarity and support to the Syrian Arab Republic and for sending relief aid. Al-Assad said his country's greatest appreciation is for Oman's support throughout the terrorist war launched against Syria. In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government is moving forward with its plan to reform the country's judicial system despite a high rejection expressed in massive protests and warnings from business leaders and even from Israel's ally, the United States. With 63 votes in favor and 47 against on Monday, the initiative was approved in the first of 3 votes in Parliament. Now, the bill will return to the Constitution, Law and Justice Committee for preparation for the 2 remaining debates to be held late in March. According to the government, the reform seeks to improve a system that gives too much say to the courts and the government's legal advisors on how laws and decisions are made. However, the opposition argues that it will alter the country's system of checks and balances and concentrate power in the hands of the Prime Minister. In Afghanistan, an explosion was reported on Tuesday near a mosque in central Kabul. The explosion was recorded near the Abul Fasl shrine. However, authorities are not yet releasing any information on possible casualties or damage. The police in the area indicated that the investigation is still ongoing, noting that as from the Taliban takeover, several incidents of this type have occurred in the country. A similar explosion took place on February the 4th in Kabul city, in which 2 people were injured. In Nigeria on Monday, local health authorities reported that the death toll from Lassa fever has risen to 85 since the beginning of the year. According to the latest update by Nigeria's Center for Disease Control, this year they have registered a total of 531 cases for a fatality rate of 16%. Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, and so far 79 local government areas across 20 states have recorded at least 1 confirmed case this year. The predominant age group affected is 21 to 30 years, and it affects men and women alike. Humans usually get infected through exposure to food or household items contaminated by the urine or feces of infected mastomys rats. On some cases, it has similar symptoms to malaria, including fever, fatigue, weakness, and headaches, which appear between 1 and 3 weeks after the exposure to the virus. In Burkina Faso, according to a new provisional balance sheet published on Monday by the army, at least 51 soldiers were killed last Friday in an ambush by suspected terrorists in the north of the country. The General Staff of the Armed Forces informed that at least 43 new bodies were found on Monday, raising the provisional balance to 51 military dead. This after previously announcing a balance of 8 soldiers killed as a result of the attack that took place last February 17th in the province of Oudalan. In this context, the statement also pointed out that in the recent operations, the uniformed managed to neutralize more than 100 terrorists at the same time that they seized and destroyed a large amount of combat equipment. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.